All right. Sweet. I will hold the microphone because I can't talk loud enough, but we are broadcasting live. And as we just did last month, actually I should probably press the button, is PDX Sass just tweeted out a nice little tweet about us being live. If you have a chance, jump on Twitter, because I know you have phones and computers and all that good stuff. And PDX Sass Twitter account, just post a little thing about it. If you can retweet that so everyone knows that we're broadcasting Sass to the world, that would be awesome. And I think if you're here, and I told you last week we give you a free t-shirt, and I forgot one last. And then there's like 3 people that are gone. If one of you was you, or if one of them was you, come to me and I'll find a free t-shirt somewhere. Because I feel horrible about that. Like, you know, put a carrot stick and just take it away. So, real quick, a few things I want to do before we get to our speakers. And I made notes. Obviously, welcome. This is PDX Sass. We are a meetup group for Sass and other front-end development frameworks and stuff. Really, Sass is a cool thing. So until we run out of topics of Sass, it's going to take a while. Maybe we'll jump to a couple other things. But thanks for coming. First thing I want to do is recognize our sponsor. Thank you, DrupalizeMe. DrupalizeMe is an online video resource for Drupal videos. I know personally, without that, I would not have the job I have today. It seriously, within like 3-4 months, trained me up from knowing like nothing about Drupal 7 to being competent enough to get a front-end position at Lullabot, which is one of the premier Drupal shops in the country. So props to them, thanks for them providing pizza. So I eating pizza, remember that. Yes. So one more thing I want to plug. Actually, 2 things. Next meetup is going to be September 12th. So keep an eye out for that. Obviously, the second Thursday of each month at 6 o'clock here. You hopefully know that because you're already here. Join either PDX Sass or if you go to PDX Sass, that is our G+ community. And I certainly post in there the events so you can RSVP. If you can RSVP, it helps me know how many people are coming so you can order my own pizza. So if you don't RSVP and you go hungry, it's your own fault, just so you know. Lastly, this is a little personal shameless self-promotion, or something like that. I want to introduce Sass Bites. We just had our second Sass Bite today, for those that caught it. Sass Bites is going to be a weekly, probably 20-minute or so on-air hangout broadcast, where we just do like a quick presentation. Today I talked about building a mixin. And just the basic steps of what's included in mixing, what you can do with it, and all that kind of fun stuff. It was good enough that Paul Irish watched, so I hope it's good enough for the rest of you. It was pretty fun. It's a good viewership. So keep an eye out on, again, Google+ community and follow PDX Sass on Twitter, and there'll be updates about when that's happening. And actually, it's every Thursday at 12 p.m., so that's when it's happening. But I'll have links to the events and all and the videos and all that kind of stuff. Everything we do is also recorded, so as you know, I've already been talking about that. So if you go back to our G+ community page and go to events, it has all of our past events. It has last month's talk where I talked about organizing Sass. It has both of the Sass Bites that we've done, and it'll have all the future ones as well. So if you've missed it or you want to recommend it to someone else, tell them to go check out the community, because that'll have all the links and all the videos and all that kind of good stuff there. So I think that's the last thing I need to plug, possibly. Yes, that's it. So sweet. So first we've got up Scott, who is going to talk to us about, what are you talking to us about? Favorite mixins. So speaking of mixins, he is going to tell us about all the sweet mixins he's got in his head. If I can get this thing going. This started. Is red on? No. Hit the button. I'll swap it. And there you go. Thanks, Scott.
And I'm just going to take that right off there. But yeah, this could be a quick talk, about 10, maybe 15 minutes at most. Sort of low level. I'm assuming that you know what Sass is and you're interested, but maybe don't have a ton of experience. So for those of you who have more experience, sorry, but you know, one of the things that I wanted to make sure this meetup group was doing was reaching out to people who are trying to learn about it and trying to come to the community for the first time. So yeah, I'm going to talk about some of my favorite Sass mixins. A little bit of background about me. I've been a front-end developer for about 12 years now. I just started using Sass about 3 years ago. And I am what you might call a reluctant convert. There were many years where I told a friend of mine who was trying to convince me to use preprocessors, he's like, oh my God, Sass is so great. Scott, you would love it. You would absolutely love it. I'm like, Sass is for babies. Sass is for people who don't know how to optimize their code. I felt pretty badass, but I was wrong. And one of the mix-ins I'm going to share today, even though it's horribly out of date and you shouldn't use it, is the one that ended up convincing me that, okay, this is good, this can work. So here it is right now. So linear gradient, this is a very simple mix-in. All it does is let you create a gradient, from loved gradients. We had to do this all the time. I got so tired of copying and pasting the gradient code with all the prefixes. And you'll notice a trend as you go through mix-ins that a lot of them exist solely to save you the trouble of vendor prefixes, and that's fine. That's absolutely valid. One of the things I was worried about when I started seeing people making mix-ins that existed solely to package vendor prefixes was, well, what happens when that becomes a standard thing? You don't need it anymore. And the perfect example of that, we'll talk about it a little bit later, is border radius. You don't need border radius prefixes anymore, but all the big packages still include the border radius mix-in. It's fine. The mix-in now just contains a single line. So these things can sort of fix themselves over time. It lets you update all your code in one place without having to, do massive search and replace. So anyway, the thing that's relevant about this is not actually the gradient, because that's time saver. But that wasn't what convinced me. What convinced me was that first line there. So if you can't tell what that is, you've got your fallback for if you're in a browser that doesn't support linear gradients. And almost every gradient generator out there on the web has this same code, but their first line is background A. So they just set it to the first color of the gradient, which isn't right. I wanted IE7 and whatever to have like kind of a middle color. Okay, they don't have the highlight, they don't have the shadow, but they've got the kind of average. That line there, mix color A with color B, works. And oh my God, I was a convert immediately. That convinced me. I can do that? It'll mix colors for me? All right, cool. So yeah. So before you go out and start writing all sorts of crazy mix-ins, you should know that there are a lot of packages out there that have a ton of these things already done. There's really no reason for you to write your own linear gradient mix-in or border radius mix-in or any of these kind of common packages. You've probably heard of Compass. If you're not using it already, it's kind of the default Sass package. A lot of people, when they start using Sass, this is how they get into it. Personally, Compass kind of rubs me the wrong way. I think it's a little heavy-handed. The documentation is really bad, but it has everything, man. It's worth your time to troll through the documentation and look at it, because odds are, if you can think of it, they've already got a mix-in pre-rolled for you. They've got clear fixes. They've got gradients. They've got any CSS3 feature you can think of with the vendor prefixes. The one that's a really killer feature is that they do spriting for you automatically, which is beyond the scope of this talk, but it's probably worth exploring at some point. So you don't have to make your own sprites anymore. You literally just say, use this image, and you tell it it's a sprite, and Compass will just roll it all up for you. Bourbon is very nice. If you are in a position where you can avoid using Compass, I'd recommend looking at Bourbon. It does the very similar thing. It's from, Micah, do you remember who makes Bourbon? Eric Meyer? No, I don't think he does. Yeah, well, anyway. Oh, the other Eric Meyer, yes, that's right. The most awkward. But Bourbon is basically a slimmed down version of Compass. It doesn't do everything Compass does, but it does probably 90% of it. It does it in a little bit of a smarter way, and it's much better documented. Their documentation is top-notch. It's so easy to go through it. Highly recommend it. It's actually kind of killing me that I can't use it on my current project anymore. Phil LaPierre? Yeah. Bourbon does not do sprites. Yeah. Yeah, but all the mix-ins, it does that. And the other logo up here, Bourbon Neat, that's their grid layout framework, which is another thing Compass does. So Bourbon split that out into a separate library that works with it. Anyway. Another thing to be aware of, and I keep moving the mic too close to my mouth, I'm sorry. Another thing to be aware of is that there's a lot of functions built into Sass core that you don't need to make mix-ins for. If you're doing anything that has to do with math or altering colors or things like that, odds are there's a function in there already. I've put a link up there to it. That's a short code, but you can also find it by just going to the Sass documentation and searching for functions. It's for some reason it's on a separate page, but that page lists them all out. These are just a sampling of them. So you can see I've set a variable for red and blue. You already saw the mix one. You can see that returns purple. This one at the top I love, RGBA. So you notice that the variable I'm feeding into it is a standard hex code. It doesn't have an alpha code. It doesn't have an alpha channel on it. But I can pass it into RGBA, specify an alpha value, and it returns a proper RGBA. That's super nice. If you have, like me, if you've got a library of variables and you've got your company standard style guide of colors and they're all hex codes, but you need an alpha transparent version of it, right there. I won't talk about these other ones, lighten, darken, desaturate, you can figure those out, but the point is all of these are built into core. So make sure you check that out before you start rolling your own mix-ins. So the first thing that I start looking at when I'm making mix-ins is I want to abstract away things that I do all the time. If there's a line of code that you've written more than 3 or 4 times, it probably should go into a mix-in. And keep in mind, mix-ins can also be, as I've indicated here, they can be an extend. The difference between an extend and a mix-in, as we've touched on before, is basically if you need to pass variables into it, make it a mix-in. If you don't need any variables, if there's no logic happening, it's just a chunk of code, you should seriously consider making it an extend instead. And I'll talk about that more in a second. But the example here is if you're doing image replacement, you've probably written this chunk of code 1,000,000 times. There's no reason to write overflow hidden text indent display block 100 times in your style sheet. Write it once, extract it in. ClearFix, okay. I put this up here. I actually talked to Micah about this last week. He had this in his slide deck, and Micah did his ClearFix as a mix-in, and that rubbed me the wrong way. And I don't want to get up here and tell you I'm right and he's wrong, but I am. But the reason I wanted to talk about this is worth talking about. So here's ClearFix as a mix-in. So you define your mix-in, and then you've got alpha and omega, and in both of them you're including ClearFix, all right? No problem. This is the rendered code. So you get alpha, color red, and then alpha ClearFix, and then omega, color blue, and omega's ClearFix. Now these are just 2, but you can already see that code gets echoed in multiple times. Now ClearFix is only a few lines of code, but you can imagine if you've got, for example, a button or something like that, that might be a lot more lines of code. It might be worth collapsing. ClearFix in particular is a weird example though, because it'll appear hundreds of times in your style sheet. I didn't want that. Sure, it's only 3 lines of code, but I didn't want that 3 lines of code hundreds of times. So what I prefer is to make it an extend. So same definition up top, but I use the % instead. The % is just short code that means don't render this out into the final rendered style sheet. It's just there as something that's available to Sass. And then we extend it into alpha and omega. And the rendered code looks like this. That's great. Your ClearFix only appears 1 time. The downside to this, as Micah pointed out to me, is you end up with one hellacious rule. So if you're inspecting your CSS, You know, you'll have, okay, here's the code from this, here's the code from this, and then there's this massive block of like 3,000 selectors that shows all your clear fixes. I haven't done the math. I can't say that the performance is better. I just know it feels better to me to have it in one place, even if it is a hellacious selector. All right. Here's another fun mix-in. So you may have heard of REMs. If you haven't, a REM is a relative M unit. So normally M's are cascading, right? So if you have your parent element is set to 1.5 M, and then an element inside of that is set to 1 M. It's actually set to 1.5 M because it's relative to its parent. A REM unit is relative to the root of the document at all times. So whatever your base font size is, it's always relative to that. So the nice thing is you can say, you know, parent element is 1.5 M and something inside of that is 1 rem, it'll still be set to 1. It won't be relative to that one. Anyway, getting a little too into it. The point is, you can make a nice abstract mix-in that says, what font size are you looking for? You provide that without a unit. You've got your base font size, and we've provided a default value here. You can override that, but by default it's set to 16. And then we'll just append pixels to it so that you've got a fallback for IE and other browsers that don't support REMs. And then we do the math. And if you haven't seen this math before, this is all over responsive web design. It's target divided by context. So in this case, our target is the font size we want, divided by our base font size, and then we just append rem to it. And the output is right here. This might seem a little abstract if you're not familiar with REMs, but it's a nice example of how here's a common bit of math that I don't want to have to do, and I don't have to. Sass does it all for me. I just tell it, font size 24, it figures out the math for me. All right, so I actually put this in as an example of what not to do. This is one of the most common examples. You see this everywhere. Everybody's talking about, hey, you know, what can you do with mix-ins? Well, you can do your breakpoint logic. Oh, that's great. So we do mix-in breakpoint. You say what breakpoint you're targeting, and then we actually have some conditional logic in here. We've got an if-else. So if desktop, we declare a media query, and we echo out the rules you've provided, et cetera, and so forth. And then down in your style sheet, you can say include breakpoint, tablet, special code for tablet. The logic here is fine. The problem is you're targeting devices, which you shouldn't do. And I know that's weird, but what you want to do is target breakpoints that are different depending on logic. So you're not always going to have mobile, tablet, desktop. You might end up a year from now, some new device that comes out that sits right in the middle. Suddenly none of your logic addresses it. This is something that the big names are always talking about. I tweeted this yesterday. I forget who said it. I want to say it was Luke Robluski, but he said you'll always be better off if you're writing your CSS based on squishing your browser window. You're going to be much better prepared for oddball devices that come up later, because rather than looking at specific breakpoints, you're going to be looking at what happens when the browser gets this small. What happens when it gets... Works really well if you're doing a grid-based layout, because rather than saying mobile width, you say 6 column. So if it's but I think you'll find it works a little better. So this is a fine mix-in. The logic is good. It's good to keep in mind that you can do if else in there, but the math, the intention behind it of targeting devices is bad news. All right, and last thing that I wanted to talk about, this is something 37 Signals actually posted recently. If you've got, you know, your Retina images, so you've got your company's logo, and you also want to put out the Retina version of the logo, by default you have to specify the background image, then specify the Retina background image, and then specify a new background size. Well, who wants to do all that math? You don't have to. So they wrote a mix-in that says image 2x, you provide a new image path, a width and a height, and it in query that looks for Retina devices. It's a little overwhelming, but basically it's just looking for anything that's more than 1 pixel ratio. And if it is, then we render out a new background image and background size. You can actually get a little smarter than this if you're using Compass. So that flashed a little faster than you probably saw, but up at the top, you'll notice we're no longer passing in a width and a height. Compass will return the width and height of an image if you use that function. So if you're using Compass, you can make this even simpler. You just say, if we're Retina, use this image, and it'll automatically update the width and height for you. Sorry, I feel like I kind of plowed through that real fast. I didn't want to take up more time than I needed. Does anybody have any questions? Go back 1 slide. Done. Oh, nope, not done. Uh-oh. There we go. Improved. Yeah, we can upload it somewhere. Yeah, I'll put it up on SlideShare or something and post it on the Google channel. Which one? Gotcha. What he's pointing out is that the if-else logic in here is actually a little bit fragile. If you pass in a value that it's not expecting, it just fails silently. So he's suggesting instead make 3 different mix-ins for each breakpoint, or 1 mix-in for each breakpoint. That way, if you do something wrong, it'll just fail with an error. What did you say? You can also set a default, yeah. So do you just say else at the bottom? Oh, you just write the style at the top, yeah. Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So you can pass a default. You can write. All right. You're using this exact example? Yeah, well, you know. There's nothing wrong with the logic. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So what we're talking about is nested media queries. They've done some testing. Yeah, yeah. The nested media queries don't have a performance impact. It does make it harder to maintain and harder to read. That's true. What the other thing I will say is that yeah, it's a pain to have your media queries scattered throughout your document, but it also makes them self-contained. I've gone the other direction and put all my media queries down in a separate document. Okay, I have mobile CSS. And the problem is immediately mobile CSS and desktop CSS drift out of sync. So by keeping them all in the same place, whenever you go to edit your header, oh, right, I have to update the mobile styles for that. I think I'm well over my time, but anybody else? All right, thanks, guys.
Testing, testing. All right. I'm going to apologize right now. My code highlighting really sucks. Yours was really good. What did you use, by the way? That was all screenshots? You can't do that. Oh, God. My code sucks. So bear with me as we go through this. Hi, my name is Christopher Bloom. You'll find me at Epic all over the internet. And I, too, was a reluctant Sass convert. I was a big Les guy. We were Les shop for like a year. I was like, Les has everything I need. We've got I can nest my selectors 14 deep, and I'm happy. And then Dan Lin, some of you guys know, showed me spriting. And it was like, hallelujah, I saw the light, white light. It was beautiful. So yeah, we've been doing Sass for about 9 or 10 months now. And today I'm going to talk about a little known piece of core Sass built right in that gives you a whole lot of power. And you actually used it in your presentation. And we're going to go into a little bit more detail about that. And that's the @content. We just covered this a little bit earlier, but basically, if you need arguments, if you need use the same set of rules or styles over and over and over again, use extend. They allow us to start thinking in object-oriented CSS. We get to be a little bit more OO with our code, and extends are awesome. So really quick, let's just talk about the extend refresher. I know we just saw this, but for those of you that are new, by the way, who here is actually really new to Sass and Compass, like kind of just getting into it? All right, so there's some value here. Basically, with extends, right, we get to declare one certain style. We can then apply it to multiple random right around where that thing used to be, okay? So we can extend dot classes, or we can do silent extends, which use percentages and then just don't include the percentage thing. But you can see it's a great way to take a whole lot of selectors and get them all to use and share the same class. So super handy, really clean. Okay, and mixins, which is what we're mainly going to deal with today with the @content directive, just let us pass arguments, so they get a little bit more dynamic. Now, the downside is they, of course, copy the value into whatever selector we call them from. Not a big deal for the most part, because generally when we're passing arguments, we need that code to change and repeat a little bit. So you can see just a little mix-in demo, couple of colors, apply it by passing some random colors, and that's what we get, right? Pretty straightforward. Now, the power with @content, it allows us to take our mix-ins, throw our arguments, which we're already familiar with, okay, but an arbitrary blob of text can go right along with our mix-ins and just pass right on over. It's really cool. Basically, we can declare @content in any mix-in, and then whenever we pass a string to it, that string will show up at the location of @mixin inside of @content inside of our mixin. This lets us really abstract away selectors and directives. We're going to get into a little bit more detail on that here in a second. But so instead of thinking args, start thinking selectors, passing dynamic selectors, and that's very really powerful. Okay, so let's take a look at what's going on here. Real simple. We're going to have another mixin. It's got a color. It's going to place the color in, but it also includes this @content thing right in the bottom. So when we call it, we can call include content example. We're going to pass an argument, but we throw on another nested bracket and just give it something, anything. This could be anything we want to pass it. It can be a couple of more declarations. It could be things like media queries, which is we're going to see here in just a second. But you can see once it gets output, we can see where our original argument was, and then this arbitrary value that we just threw right on over to it. So you might be asking, well, why couldn't I just do this already with, just the next line, including a rule? Well, take a look here. I'm sorry the text is so small, but bear with me. There's a nice hack for IE6 that if you start a selector with star HTML, IE6 gets it and nothing else does. So it's a really good way to target IE6 very specifically for it to handle certain situations. And for those of you that say IE6 is dead, I'm on a project right now that has to deal with a lot of people from China, so 30% of our users are on IE6, and I want to kill myself. So we get this nice mix-in, this IE6 mix-in, where what we do is we combine our referencing parent selector, which is another, probably have its entire own presentation. Suffice it to say, when you've got the ampersand, whenever it's used, it grabs all of its parent selectors that you nested inside and puts them either, and just puts them where the ampersand is. So as an example here, we're going to go call logo. We're going to give it a nice normal background image, okay, pretty standard stuff. Then when we include this IE6 thing, and we give it an arbitrary chunk of stuff here, okay? Sometimes maybe you want to, like, I don't know, pass in hot pink to your IE6 users so they know they're IE6 users and they should feel bad, right? So you don't have to give them a background image. You can give them a random color. You can give them a, you know, just sort of arbitrary whatever gradient even that they wouldn't be able to see because they're an IE6. But when we see this, right, we get our logo. It includes our normal background image. And then the next line below it, we get logo placed here because that's where the ampersand was, and our arbitrary string value that we sent right on over. Super cool, okay? So now we have this ability to start kind of shifting around where our selectors arrive at given our mix-ins. So yeah, pretty cool. That's kind of a little bit of a contrived example there. And so here's where we actually get the most power out of @content, and that is when we start to combine it with media queries. Now, understand right off the bat that Sass already handles media queries in a really unique way. I actually didn't really know this. I just started doing it, and then I had to write raw CSS one day, and I kept trying to nest media queries, and it wasn't working. I couldn't figure out why, and then I just had to look it up, and like, hey, what do you know? Sass bubbles up our media queries already for us. How cool is that? You talked about this a little bit. Like, it scatters around, yes, in the rendered CSS, but I haven't looked at the rendered CSS in a long time, so who cares? But what we do get is we get context, right? We get context on those media queries. We get to nest them inside what they're really affecting, which I think is really awesome because I'm going to spend more time looking at this, right? So we got sidebar, we give it a width, and then just naturally, if we throw a media query at it, it's going to just break it right out for us and set it right next to it. That's great. That's awesome. That makes handling media queries so much less painful. Yeah. Now let's take media queries and their natural bubbling, and let's include the @content, and you can get some crazy kind of wizardry here. And I'm going to show you the exact example we were told not to use, literally. So, but there's a lot to be said for this. What if we call this like small and not so small, right? Like, yeah, don't label devices. I totally agree with that. I'm a Foundation guy. I love the Foundation framework a lot. And they kind of do the same thing. They've got their small, medium, large, and they're like, look, whatever that means to you, go crazy. You're in a grid anyway. It doesn't really matter. So let's just conceptually here, let's say, hey, okay, we're going to go deal with specifically handhelds that are, you know, 479 and smaller, and then wide handhelds. But take a look. They nest their media query in their mixin, and they pass it arbitrary stuff, okay? So that lets us very easily use some kind of almost real English to say, media, let's respond to handhelds, don't float it, okay? And we're contextual, all right? Respond to wide handhelds, don't float. So you can kind of see that by using this, by letting the media queries sort of behave the way they normally want to in Sass, plus using some kind of nice semantic language to deal with media queries, we get a lot, yeah, it makes it a lot easier to read. I understand what I'm trying to do here, right, by looking at this. It is interesting to note that you don't need to use @content to really get a lot of power out of media queries in Foundation. They just use a string literal, so you can have your named media queries. They'll bubble up anyway. This is just kind of a cool example of how you can use it and kind of put content to a lot of good use there. Yeah, this is kind of a lot of what we just went over. But basically, yeah, we're able to bubble up media queries the way they want to already in whatever context we throw them at. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, so when we've got to go deal and we're playing with sprites, encompass sprites, right? Really super simple to just include it and walk away. All the media queries are handled for us. That's awesome. A great example, and here, Mike, I might need your help clicking this here. This is a lot of stuff to go through, but basically, this is a gigantic, wacky handling of retina sprites. A little more complex than what was the magazine that did that? The 37. Okay. This is Chris Buhlman from Lullabot, I believe. And it's a little more flexible. It's a lot more in depth. But I want you to notice this is his @content usage right here. Okay, in this huge giant mixin where he's running through a bunch of various mixins that call other mixins. If we go here, okay, his application of this mixin is simply this right here: include retina sprite item. He passes vars over to it. Those vars get handled as their own. It's incredibly powerful, and it's just nested inside of 3 other mixins that call each other, and we get a really, really great dynamic retina sprite mixin. That's a really cool usage of content that doesn't necessarily, that isn't like, I'm going to respond exactly to this. This is like okay. Yes, sir. Yes. You want to go to the gist? Okay. There's the regular value. There's the extra value, and this right here, that's your @content. That's what goes over. You pass your stuff right on over to it, and it gets included in it. Yep. Yep. Very cool. Of course, really big, pretty complex. I don't want to write it, but hey, if it kind of works right out of the box like that. I have no idea. I actually haven't had a chance to use it. Have you used this? The retina sprites?
I know it's really clean. I mean, it's based off of Compass, so it's similar cleanup, but I have.
I do think it's kind of funny in Sass that like we went from like don't write a lot of Sass, or don't write a lot of CSS, write a little bit of Sass, and now we're kind of going the other direction, like hey, write a bunch of Sass, and it produces very, very little CSS. We're like, yeah, that's cool too. All right. Yeah, so basically, kind of like the takeaway of @content is, if you see media queries being used, really, really powerful media queries in Sass, they're generally going to hang out with @content. Okay, that's the main use case for @content. You can kind of pass anything to a mixin. Yeah, and why not just add it in your mixins? I mean, maybe you want to just allow people to toss arbitrary text at something. It's great for that one instance where you have a mixin that's got 9 declarations in it, but you kind of actually want to overwrite the last little, like maybe top position at the end. Go ahead and just throw, here's my mixin, but top's going to be 10 pixels instead of like 15 for whatever reason, right? Great little way to say like I'm doing something slightly different in the context of this particular mixin. What else we got? Yeah, this is actually a great article. If you guys want to check this out, this is at slid.es, elliptic Sass @content. This is a cool article. What happens when we use all of these queries and we content all over our code, and now we've got thousands of individual little @media queries. It turns out not a big deal. Okay, go for it. It's more important that your Sass is readable than it is necessarily that your CSS is perfect. So yeah, just a quick little look. A lot of people are using it. Look on GitHub. There's about 10,000 examples of ACT content being used in different full IE stuff. If just let me know. Do you guys have any questions about ACT content? Is that the one that's got Keanu Reeves from Point Break on it? Yes, everyone remembers that one. Yeah, they're actually using. It's essentially a really a much more elegant version of that guy right there. Is essentially what they're giving you. It's just a big mixin that says it lets you declare in a bunch of variables what your breakpoints are and then what their various arguments would be, and it goes and it generates all of that logic for you. There's a lot of loops involved, but yeah, very cool. But it gives you named breakpoints, which is really important. And it's got Keanu Reeves on the landing page, which is rad. Wait, variables in break in. Right, right. Okay, right, exactly. Versus sort of like including everything all at once and being really hard-coded about these widths, you instead say, hey, you know what, my media query itself is going to hold the variables, right? Is that in 3.3?
No, it's certainly 3.2.
Oh, killer.
What she's talking about is when you send media in, media would be like a pixel value, right. And then media then goes into, instead of 479, media gets placed there.
Very nice.
And the nice thing with that is media, what you send in could be a variable. It could be like your $sign, mama bear, papa bear, whatever you're going to use, or you could just send in your own string. That's usually what I use on a response to mixin. So you can send in like preset, like all of your 3 or 4 different preset ones, or send in a string of like just 3 pixels left or 20 pixels less, because oftentimes you have that one random thing that needs to be tweaked somewhere different. So
all right. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. And Mikey P, I'm going to have to pull up your slides, but hop on up and tell us what we're going to be talking about.
My presentation is not nearly so formal. I am not not a front-end dev, but I like to play one on TV. Most of my work is I work with CMSs a lot, and a lot of my work ends up being Bootstrap, Foundation, whatever framework du jour I can reuse and do a little bit less work. But along the way, I found a bunch of really cool. Is everything okay? Yes. There we go. A bunch of little tricks and tips that I love to use to make things work that make my life a lot simpler. These are probably really obvious to everyone else, but these have saved me a lot of pain. And is this? I'm not sure. There it goes. Oh. Let's go back. I had way too much fun with Impress.js. So when I say frameworks, this is about like the tips and tricks. These are, I mean, you can argue that Bootstrap's a terrible framework and an affront against humanity all you want. But a lot of people do a lot of quick things with it, and so that's what I'm going to talk about. The 3 base things I'm going to cover are simple semantic layout, keeping it semantic, and and the main thing I hate is does and all your other things, that is not their idea. They can't assume anything about your markup. Other full of classes like row and large 6, and I hate that. Like I said, I use a CMS. I do a lot of work with Drupal, and it has its idea of like, here's your markup, so style this, and I'm like, I don't want to go in and edit all this. So especially with Bootstrap, which does this lovely selector with globbing onto span. That drives me nuts. It's a pain. So Sass to the rescue, especially with the Bootstrap Sass gem, by the way. Here's the foundation idea. I don't have any syntax highlighting, so you can get the idea. But the idea is I love extend because it lets me build an entire layout with a grid system on top of something without touching the markup whatsoever, which makes me very happy. And the Bootstrap trick, although this is actually Bootstrap 2, not Bootstrap 3, moves away from this, doesn't do the globbing on the span class. But it turns out if you just put span without a span column on there, it works. So that's my first trick. And like I said, it works great because especially like you could actually do this on top of a plain CSS framework that you just import into a Sass file. It doesn't actually have to be Sass. I know, and it doesn't require mixins, which Foundation used to have grid mixins, but I don't think it does anymore. Or at least they're not putting them in the docs. I haven't found them. So that's my first quick trick. Keeping with my semantic theme, if you can't tell, I really hate non-semantic markup a lot. I love Font Awesome. I use it all the time, and it's probably cliche on the web today, but it does this lovely thing where you're sticking your icons and your markup all over the place. And to me, that's what it looks like, a big pile of poo everywhere. And the other thing that really bugs me is a lot of times I want to edit content that in projects I work with is in the database, and it has standard markup, but it's not in a place where I can go through and edit all their posts and say, well, this read more link, I want to now add an icon to. So this is kind of long, but this is the basic idea. The new Font Awesome actually defines variables for all the Unicode, so I don't have to copy and type Unicode, which also makes me very happy. And this just basically adds in the, just changes it from the regular Font Awesome is a before selector, this is an after, and it just adds the content, and it just works. And I can even modify it if I have like 3-4 different kinds of markup that I want to treat the same way. It's super easy. So that's that trick. This last one is really in the hack category. That is, you probably should never do this, but it's just something noteworthy, I guess, that I've had to do with a framework. Because everyone loves grids, right? Like pixels, that's like the ultimate grid. Does anyone have, this is an aside, but many years ago, I was actually asked by a designer to move something half a pixel. This was before Retina screens existed, so it was a very interesting conversation. So yeah, but on that note, grids are great, right? So you have to move something like half of a grid column, which as soon as I say that, I wince because you would think like you just write some markup. But for some reason, this project is the simplest way in my head to implement this design was to actually implement half grids, half columns. And so I did something like this. And this is really small, but the long and short of it is, this is from Bootstrap 2 Sass gem. I wanted to extend half columns, and I wanted to add push-pull, which I think Bootstrap at the time only had offset, which was like push. And I wanted to do content ordering. So I thought, well, I'd like to have pull too. So I thought, well, I should be able to, instead of just writing all this out, I should be able to reuse the mixin that generated. To find it, I had to scan a bunch of stuff. Eventually, I found a mixin that they defined called this grid core span X, and I went down through it and I was like, oh, span. This is where I need. Actually wrote a half column mixin, a pull, and a push, and then I put them all in the parent that iterates over it and drop this in a mixins overrides file and put it at the top of my variables, and voila, you can now do half grids on some of my sites, half column grids. So yeah, this is not really something I recommend, but just the idea of like, you know, taking a framework that it does a bunch of stuff for you, but that doesn't always mean it's exactly what you want to do. And that doesn't mean that you just are stuck with it, but you can actually override framework behavior and write your own with Sass, and it lets you do that. It's not like I have to write a bunch of rules afterwards. I actually went and changed the original rule, and I thought it worked really well, even though I shouldn't have done it to start with. But but the trick to that was you can either work backwards through your source to try to find where the mixin's defined, which isn't always super obvious. But the other trick I mentioned was scan through the mixins file, and if you look through that, eventually you'll find someplace that has that class definition that looks like what you're looking for, and that was how I found that one. So that's my 3 simple tricks. That's all I've got. It's just a few things. Yeah, they've been doing Sass since version 2, and they changed it to SCSS files. I can't pull it up, but yeah, and they actually have it now broken out into like mixins, variables, all underscored, so you can actually include it in your project, and then it actually has a variable for every icon name, which is awesome now, because when I first did that, I was actually copying the Unicode, and that was a pain. Yeah, if you go to the GitHub project. Yeah. So, any other questions? Yes. Semantic.gs is another that lets you build your own grid. Yeah. Yeah, I know there's also the big thing used to be SUSE, and Semantic. I know there's options, and Sass of course lets you build all that yourself, and Compass used to have Blueprint in it, which lets you do the semantic grid, but I was like at that 95% done in Bootstrap. So, anything else? Yay.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, that's good timing, because Pete's guy is going to call in a couple minutes, and I'll remember to run down this time so I can actually sign the credit card slip. I didn't do it last time. So at the end of this, we always want to give an opportunity for people here that are representing companies to talk about any job openings that their companies might have, because I know there are people that are here that are on the lookout or job hunting, or at least might want to know what else is out there. So if we can have some people raise their hands and just kind of give a quick heads up of everyone they're looking for, what kind of positions and all that. Do we have anyone that wants to do that? Yes. Way in the back. Way in the back. Why you gotta be way in the back? Go ahead. I'll translate. Yeah. So Puppet Labs, and that's partly why we're here, because they want to attract great talent here. Is hiring. There's a big list on the door if you can get to that door. If you can't get to the door, I'm sure that on the website they have a bunch. But developers, I think front ends, a lot of people. That's kind of why they invited us here, because like front end developers, a bunch of front end developers hanging out in our labs. That would be a great idea. So, so apparently that worked for them. So anyone else? I know. Oh, Josh, I was just going to say Lullabot, but. Yeah, I think I saw that too. Yeah, so Lullabot is looking for designer for the Drupalize.me with a capital M. I was corrected earlier today. I did not spell it right. And our sales manager was like dying, rolling over his grave if he was in a grave. So they are looking for a designer for that position. They, again, do all the videos and obviously a lot of print material and motion graphics and all that kind of fun stuff. So they're looking for designers. We're looking for... you just said it and I completely lost it. We're always looking for good talent. Yep. We'll find a spot for you. Yeah, we oftentimes find ourselves like having to turn down jobs because we just don't have the people for it. And when that happens, it's kind of sad. But it happens sometimes. So was there anyone else that's from a company who wants to give a quick shout out? I know we had 4 or 5 last time. 2? I'm expecting more. Come on, do the recruiting. So, all right. Well, we've got 5 minutes left until pizza's probably here. So, if you guys want to just hang out for a couple more minutes, again, drinks over in the corner. Don't dry them out completely. Maybe just a couple of them. And yeah. Sweet. Excellent. Because we have 2 things. We need topics, and we also need speakers. I think I've roped Josh in. He owes me like 20 beers at this point, so I might convert them into a talk. I know he's going to be slated up to come up soon, but we certainly are looking for people that are willing to speak up here. As you see, like last month, I did like a whole 45-minute presentation because I had to put that together for a different talk. But today was just a couple short 15 minutes, and if people are interested in doing those, that's awesome. We're also looking for people to do quick, like 15-minute demos for our Sass bites. So again, just ping me anytime you have like an interest in that, and we can kind of talk about it. Really, nothing's too mundane. We've had everything from like, here's how you build a mix-in, to like, here's some crazy mix-ins that like it'll take you 2 weeks to put together. So we're certainly looking for everything that's there. Are there any particular topics? And we have people of all different levels. So is there anyone? Sorry, bring it. Sure.
So for the front end tool, Chris and I did 2 presentations together, and one was kind of like.
Hey Josh, do you want to grab pizza? Just sign my name. Okay. Some advanced stuff. Let's go really deep. Yep. A little deeper. Mm-hmm. Gonna confuse you with Git. We're gonna get you, sucker. Kind of Git. Nice. Cool. Yeah, pick a subject, and we can do like beginning. Nice. Yeah. So we had other hands. What are some other subjects people are interested in? I know. You cannot extend from excited media query unless what you're extending is inside the exact same media query. I certainly have some of that. No. It's just the fact that the way that you extend is just by tacking on selectors. So if you're selecting this class and you extend it, you're now selecting 2 classes. Well, you can't tack on a media query to those selectors. So it's the way that CSS works. And there's lots of ways to go around it. It's a lot of it more of an architectural choice than it is more of a technical choice. It's just building it properly from the ground up to hopefully avoid some of those things. So no, that's a great topic. It'd be a good one to go into. And we have pizza, and hopefully Josh is coming up as well. Do you leave him outside in the cold? All right, and we had another one real quick. Is there something else? Yep, somebody grab the pizza, please. Apparently they missed each other. All right, go ahead. Ooh, yeah. What was the most recent one? I just saw. Okay, so regression testing. So like doing basically like unit testing. I'm a big tester, but that'd be a pretty deep topic. That'd be pretty cool. If someone wants to tackle that, because that certainly has not been me. If you want to dig into it, and like even just like a primer, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't even understand what that testing would require. I know there's a couple things with like Browser Stack has a really sweet API that you can basically feed it some information, feed it some variables of pages and media queries, and it will go and take snapshots of all of those media queries, of all of those sizes, of all of the different devices and browsers, and give you those snapshots back. So you can see, you know, just real quick how that page is going to behave in all those different ones. So there's some cool stuff. Joe. Was that live style? Hey, I don't know if that's really, that's just CSS though. It's not working with Sass though, is it? Yeah, I know that's, yeah, I know, I saw that. I was like, sweet. I know there's a project right now called libsass that is basically taking Sass out of Ruby and moving it over into machine language. So into C a whole lot faster. Hopefully what that will mean is that you could do that. Like you have those compile times that are fast enough to do it real time. So hopefully we can see some of that in the future. So source maps would be an awesome one. I've done them in 3.2. I've not done them in 3.3 yet. Yeah. There's some really awesome stuff in Chrome right now. Yeah, Compass has not moved over to it yet. Yeah. See, there's source mapping in 3.2, which is kind of like a ghetto source map, and it works great. It like allows you it allows you to inspect an element and then see which partial is actually applying that style to that. So instead of trying to dig in your CSS and look down through it, it'll say, hey, that's the footer partial, and you can click on it and actually jump right to the partial. In Sass 3.3, it's even better. It's not ghetto anymore. There's actually a JavaScript file that connects everything, and it goes even as far as this color blue. Where does that come from? Well, here's the partial that's extending over to this file. There's the blue right there. So source maps in 3.3 is going to be amazing once everything kind of settles down. Paul Irish, we'll try and get him out. Paul, if you're listening, come out to Portland. Yeah.
So since we don't have source maps, and I think everybody kind of built that one thing to basically inspect an element and like, all right, where that element just comes from.
Yep.
Organization.
Well, I talked a bit about that last time. Yeah. There you can go really deep. I could certainly get into kind of like what was the right word for not object, but yes, Max and whatnot. I struggled a lot today with the idea of trying to keep all your styles in that partial, in that like component. I had a block that was moving from the content region to a sidebar region, and it puked all over because there are a ton of styles applied specifically to sidebar, like sidebar list items, all have a margin top. Like, why? No, like every specific thing that goes into that should have its own declarations, and you can extend from it, sure. But anyway, long story. I certainly think we could probably go down that road. So pizza's here. So let's go ahead and call adjourn. Thanks everyone for coming. And again, next month, I should have wrote down there. Next month, second Thursday, we'll do it again. Thanks.